I'm Umila, and I'm here to talk about something. I'm, I'm here to talk about something I've witnessed in my community, but I hope we have a future without. Last year, in New York City, there were over 100,000 intimate partner violence reports. And there are 30 intimate partner violence homicides. The very first happened on New Year's, and it was the death of Singh, who was murdered by her husband. She was a young mother, and she was one of several domestic violence-related murders in the Indo-Caribbean community. This is my community. And this is my family. They're from a small country in South America called Guyana. And like the term indicates, Indo-Caribbean is a hybrid of two cultures. Indo-Caribbeans come from Guyana, Trinidad, Suriname, and Jamaica, and have Indian roots. For thesis, I partnered with the Jahajee sisters, a grassroots organization of survivors and activists working to end gender-based violence in our community. Intimate partner violence, also known as domestic violence, is a range of coercive and abusive behaviors. It goes beyond physical violence. Perpetrators exert power and control to limit the survivor's choices. From survivors, I have heard stories where perpetrators limit their access to their medication, to their bank accounts, and to their families. And for me, breaking this pattern of abuse and this pattern of power and control meant that I had to center the survivor's power and control, and not mine. So this meant I passed the decision-making powers to them. And I began this process by examining trauma and learning trauma-informed practices. And I realized during this process I can facilitate towards their healing. And my biggest takeaway from this was that survivors need a strong social support network. They need someone to turn to. So my second principle became to restore their connections to community, and I began to explore gaps in their existing support network. I want to introduce you to Shelly. Shelly is an Indo-Caribbean survivor who needs someone to share her story with. But when she turns to family and friends, they don't listen. She feels judged, she feels blamed. She feels judged, she feels blamed, and she feels ashamed. And when she doesn't want to turn to formal services due to fear, immigration concerns, and stigma. Like many of the survivors I spoke to, they felt overwhelmed by the court and criminal justice systems. And Shelley really felt stuck without someone to turn to. She really felt stuck without having support from her community. But then there were community members like Alicia, a young Indo-Caribbean woman whose sister is in an abusive relationship, and she really wants to support her sister, but she isn't sure how. So she looks to resources in the community and she attends a support group. And while she enjoys meeting women from her community, she leaves unsure on how to support her sister. She sees the local precinct tabling services on domestic violence, but she feels intimidated by the cops and is worried her family might see her at the table. So I also realized we need to provide community with agency and information on how to better support survivors. And the problem that I was looking at was that survivors and community members are disconnected. Survivors are already isolated from their community, and the community's lack of information furthers this gap. So how could I bridge the gap? There was a community who wanted to heal, and there was a community who wanted to help, and they both needed agency. So I thought collaboration was a way to do this. So I explored how might I foster collaboration between survivors and community members. Introducing She Collab. This is my intervention, and it is a co-designed program where survivors and community members work together to generate new sources of support based in community. And we begin with letting survivors define their needs. While service providers want to center survivors' choices, there aren't many opportunities for survivors to inform what resources look like. And from all of the survivors, I heard that they wanted support in community and not systems. And so I spoke to survivors, and they generated a long list of unmet needs. For my presentation, I will be focusing on peer support, healthy relationship education, and safety. And then we invite community members to join us on this conversation. And together we brainstorm and ideate what support looks like together. And to create well-informed community members who can offer the support survivors want, we train them along the way. And then we begin building and prototyping the sources of support. So I'm excited to share with you what the community has built together. The first project was led by a survivor, and it was a public art piece. And while the survivor is successfully launching her public art campaign that she's posting in the community with messages, I realized that we need to shift the burden off of survivors. Most of the individuals in this space are survivors themselves, so they're already doing the work. So we really need to partner with community members. So survivors said that they needed safety, so we partnered with a fitness studio and we offered a self-defense class. Survivors said that the community needed healthy relationship education, so we partnered with a youth group at temples, and we had a conversation on healthy relationships, and they designed posters supporting survivors for their temples. Survivors said that they needed peer support, and the community said that the greatest resource in community are the individuals themselves. So we trained them to become community advocates. And it included a group of survivors, a business owner, college students, and other community members. An expert in the field shared her knowledge to advise community advocates on how to better support survivors. And together we realized we also need to design for safety and confidentiality. We need to protect both the identity of community advocates and the survivors themselves. And the problem is a multi-layered problem, and the stigma is deep-rooted. And together, the community has generated multiple levels of support. And what I'm seeing and what I'm hoping is that survivors see these messages of support and knows that their community supports them. From messages on posters to a community of advocates, I hope the survivors open up and access the support they need. And this is Richmond Hill. It's the community I grew up in, and it's home to a large Indo-Caribbean community in Queens. The two purple pins represent the two domestic violence murders in the community, Stacey Singh's and Rajwanti Baldeo's. The blue pins represent community organizations who would like to offer support. And we're building a new network. In this process, I have worked with 9 community organizations. We have trained 11 community members to be advocates, and there are 43 participants altogether. And the community is really breaking the silence. 2 survivors have shared their stories to new audiences. There are 2 survivor-led projects, and we're building male allies in this space. And I have asked to co-lead Jahajee Sisters' Grassroots Action Team, where I'll be continuing to do this work and co-design new sources of support for survivors. One of the community advocates is the owner of this juice bar. And with him, he really talked about how can small businesses become a safe space and offer resources to survivors. And it's been really powerful to witness community members leading the creation of new resources in untraditional spaces. And I'm excited to see what this would look like in other communities. This is not just happening in my community, this is happening everywhere. We're seeing gender-based violence in all communities, and we saw this nationally with Dr. Ford. Dr. Ford, a survivor of sexual assault, was questioned and blamed. This is an expression of oppression in our greater society where we put the blame on survivors. We need to stop telling survivors they're weak. We need to stop telling survivors that they're letting this happen to them. I have been so inspired by the strength and resilience of the survivors I spoke with and the survivors who continue to tell their stories to fight for change every day. We need to change our narrative. We need to support survivors. We need to believe survivors. And we need to figure out how. And I believe it begins with listening. It's that simple. Thank you. I want to thank all of the survivors who have collaborated with me along the way. I want to thank my mom, my dad, to my DSI family, and I want to thank all of the community members who are working with me to create support in our community. Thank you.